foothills of Santa Cruz Mountains on the north, a watershed, a lowlands area, wetlands area on the east of about 1,000 feet, and a lowlands area on the west on 1,000 feet. So just the farthest farm away is 1,000 feet, roughly, in either direction. And in two directions, we have the Pacific Ocean, so somebody maybe in Japan, and then Santa Cruz Mountains on the other side. The crops that are grown around us are Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts have two major pests in California. One's cabbage aphid, and the other is diamondback moth. They're both from a long ways away. I think they're both from Eastern Europe, you know.
I know what they're about.
Diamondbacks, I'm pretty sure, I think both of them are Eastern European species that came here without visas. And as a result, they present a problem. Their natural parasitoid and predator complex has not gotten here with them. Although I suspect there's probably a few critters here. So the end of the story is the guys growing Brussels sprouts who grow them year after year. So there's these big monocultures up and down the coast. In San Mateo, Santa Cruz County, Monterey County, 80% of all the Brussels sprouts in the country are grown here because they do really well in these coastal zones. And to grow them, they use some very inexpensive pesticides once every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, spread. Once every month, is that right? About a month. So they're using this organic phosphates, which were developed after World War II, and they work pretty well. They kill stuff. So according to the guys on the other side, we screwed up by deciding to have an organic farm in the middle of all this conventional farming. And we were told that our setbacks, our buffers, were not large enough. They brought in an organic expert from Florida who manages a couple hundred acres of organic citrus. And he testified and said, oh, you know, those setbacks are just not enough. 1,000 feet, not enough. You know, that's not what organic farmers do. So there were a lot of interesting stories and anecdotes I could tell about the trial, and that was one of them. The experts, they brought in experts from all over the country. They had a lot of dough to spend on people flying in and testifying against us. But we had a really good jury, some really smart people, and they could see that these guys were full of shit. And they decided that there was something wrong here. So the crux of the matter is in the state of California and in the United States, drift is defined as a chemical that moves while it's being sprayed at the time of application. So that's really important to understand, and that's what in our particular case what was unusual was there was no drift indicators that there was a gradient from a high concentration to a low concentration from our fields to someplace where it came from. We had 120 acres of spotty residues of different levels that went up and down in no particular direction. And that's important to understand because if there was a gradient of concentration from high to low, it would say, oh, the spray point, where this came from was over there, because it's stronger in that direction. They didn't find that. But they did find that there was contamination all over our farm. When the state came in and took samples, they found the same thing that we found. There was contamination all over the place. And they wrote a long study. It was about this thick. And the conclusion was that there was contamination on the farm. And they said, you can't harvest it because it's illegal. Because the crops we grow are not registered for use with those pesticides. So the pesticides that were found were not registered for use on those crops. And we said, fine, this is like a couple months afterwards. We stopped harvesting things as soon as we found out. So it was a little bit ironic that they're 2 or 3 months later telling us, and by the way, it's illegal for you, don't harvest those crops. Okay. And we said, well, but are you going to tell the guys who are spraying this stuff? They're right over there. They're just down the road that way. You can tell them to stop. No, you can't tell them that. Why? Because we found no evidence of drift. Now, how can that be? There's no evidence of drift, right? There's no evidence of drift because there was no gradient showing where it came from. And when you look at the laws in California, and I believe the federal law also has this, there's an exemption in the definition of drift. There's a sentence that says, pesticides that move after they're applied by dust-borne particles or volatilization, meaning evaporation, are exempted. They're not drift. You can't legally call a chemical that is sprayed over there, it shows up over here after it's sprayed because it blows over on the dust or evaporates off the field afterwards. It condenses here. It's not legally drift. You might die from it. In our case, we couldn't harvest the crop, but it's not drift. So the state of California said there was nobody at fault here. So we called the state in Sacramento and we asked them to look at this, and they said they would. Nothing seemed to happen. And the county came back and said, so this went on for 2 years. And the second year we said, you know, we're tired of being nice. We've asked you guys to stop spraying. The state's not finding anything wrong. But we're going to go to court. And that was how this thing evolved. There was one little instance where we had gone to court previously to ask to try to get them to stop spraying. And the judge pulled out, they presented the report from the state that said there's no drift, there's nobody at fault. And the judge said, well, we can't ask them to stop spraying because here's the official government report that says there's nobody at fault here. So we were either going to leave the ranch because we couldn't farm there anymore, because it was clear that every month when they did the applications, a few days later we'd start to pick up these pesticides and they would be there all year round. That meant people were breathing them. So we put out a thing called a little device to sample the air, and we were picking up in the air. So all year round, you're out there working in this low-level dose of organophosphates. So we took them to court. We beat them. And we beat them not on the fact that they were that there was drift. We beat them on the fact that they were trespassing on our farm. We said, you can't trespass. And you're creating a nuisance. And by the way, we told you about this last year, so you're negligent. And it turns out that however that law got written that said that things that volatilize, that evaporate, which by the way, the applicators didn't know anything about volatilization until this case. These guys are this is a really good company. They're pros. They've been doing this. They do all the applications up and down the coast and here in the valley. And they didn't apparently know about these chemicals volatilize or evaporate and move afterwards. So that was surprising. You'd think they would know. And they were a little surprised that we found out about it because we're just farmers, right? But it's pretty easy to find out. If you Google these chemicals, you learn all about it. It takes about 5 minutes. So we said they were negligent for not understanding this stuff, and we told them what was happening. So they got pounded for 3 things: trespassing, nuisance, and negligence. And the negligence per se was important because then they had to pay our court fees, our lawyer fees.
Great.
The first aspect is the fact that now there's a precedent for organic farms saying we got trespassed and damaged. You're going to have to show that there was damage. And we want to be made whole. We lost a crop for 2 years. We want to be made whole. You can now go back and say, hey, look, it happened over these guys. Trespassing is a problem. You can't trespass on my farm. That's something to remember. The other is, if you end up with trespass that's caused by chemicals that's not drip, so that would be something that doesn't happen when an application is made. Prior to this, it would be very difficult to win a case because this was just not recognized. You couldn't get the county ag commissioner to stand up and say, you can't spray within a mile of that farm, or a half mile of that farm. Today, at least in the state of California, the county ag commissioners all know about this case. They all now understand that volatilization is on the radar, and they can't ignore it. So if you have a problem with drip from volatilization, you can call up your county ag commissioner and say, I just got a residue, and you need to find out, it's your job to stop this. Because the law says that it's illegal for an applicator to spray a pesticide if there's a potential for damaging a non-target crop or problem to public health.